So, welcome to the two crazy chicks who are talking about global politics and domestic politics. But we're going to start talking about Syria and why is Syria so important and why the players who are now participating in the new Syria, if you will, are some of the old players, some of the new guys on the block, and how it is really shaping the Middle East since Assad's fall. So Mitra Rahib, who is a professor of the Middle East Studies, who teaches at FYU, who teaches at um, is going to talk with me a little bit about what's happening in Syria. So Mitra, tell me, let's kick off first with the quote unquote, um, with Mr. Assad and his betrayal.
Right. Thank you, Vicky, first of all, for inviting me. To understand what's going on, you really have to go back to 2012 or so when same actors were in power today, tried to do a coup in order to remove Assad and to split the Russian, Iranian influence in the region. So for the past 10 years or so, really, you had the Russians, the Iranians. For the past 5 years or so, you also had the Turks on their side to create this system when Mr. Assad was in power. But about a year and a half ago or so, the Iranians and the Russians realized something was wrong, right? Turkey was not, continuing its policies. And they realized something was even further wrong when it came to the Israeli invasion of Gaza. Turkey was caught repeatedly supporting Israel, whether it was providing food, whether it was providing ammunition. And what really made it clear to the Iranians and the Russians that they were betrayed was when the assassination of the Iranian ambassador in Syria, and then also the assassination of the Hamas political leader in Iran. It was then they find out that Mr. Assad was betraying Iran and Russia by working with Turkey and Israel. And so when they pretended they didn't know what was going on, they continued. But during those 4 months, what the Iranian did was, along with the Russians, they restructured their plans. The Iranian pulled out a lot of the resources, right? And they warned their allies that this is obviously we have been betrayed. So about a month ago, about several weeks ago, when the ceasefire was done between Israel and Hezbollah, Iran said, make the ceasefire, make the ceasefire. That was perceived as seen as Iran's weakness. But in reality, Iran knew the minute its ceasefire started, the Israeli would come in. And that's what the Iranians wanted. They realized, things change and you have to alter your strategy based on what's going on. So when Assad realized something was wrong, he told, obviously, the Iranians and the Turks that the Turks have been betraying, right? Have been betraying Iran and Russia, that they were always cahoots with Israelis, then he needs to help them out. The Iranians said no problem, but they didn't. The Iranians and the Russians allowed Assad to fall. And what happened is when Assad fell, you had the Israelis moving into what is Golden Heights, which the Iranian and the Russians actually in many ways hoped they would. And what you have is all these terrorists moving in, right? You have Al-Qaeda members, you have ISIS, you have anti-Assad. And just as the Iranians and the Russians had hoped, right? You have a similar of a mindset of a 2013, oh my gosh, Arab Spring is back, the dictator is gone, the Arab power democracy is going to be here. But in reality, it isn't any of that.
Yeah, but I have to interlude for a second. So first of all, you say that Assad betrayed China, Russia, and Iran. I still don't understand why, but it may be something as simple as just greed. I'm not sure. The fact that the Russians took him back in is interesting. But I want to ask a question, and that is, you know, I don't think that the US has any conception of, yeah, now we have a democracy coming or an Arab Spring or this and that. I don't think that that's true at all. In fact, I wonder aside from Israel, why the US is even getting involved there. My question to you is, why is it, do you think, that when we read anything, and I mean pretty much any major newspaper, uh, anything from the TV, etc., we get a totally different um, explanation, if you will, about what's happening in
Right.
in Syria. I mean, I think that certain things you say are correct, but there's not been one word of betrayal. There hasn't been
Right.
one word of the demise of Turkey. In essence, it's been who's losing out more is Iran because they can't use Syria anymore and parts of Russia. So why is there such a discrepancy between the two areas of the world?
Right. So it's not so much two areas of the world. I think social media has significantly changed that. So the international community, whether you're sitting in Azerbaijan or Zimbabwe or anywhere in between, no longer trusts the traditional press, right? And that was even in the United States with the domestic. I think to understand why the press gets it wrong is you have to go back to, in a way, 2001, and you have to go back to change in the media and the change in technology. Look, the time of Peter Jennings, David Brinkley, Tom Brokaw is long gone. Today, particularly post September 11, what you saw is the politicization of the press, where the press was no longer really interested in the truth, but rather based on their own agenda. What they did, what was best for the states, United States, or those who supported their view in the United States, the government. If you do look at from the Iraqi invasion that the press was gung ho for, they didn't question anything, to the Arab Spring, which they missed, and they continue to say it was about Arab rights and humanity and dignity, which it wasn't, to the overthrow of Mr. Mubarak, which led to the arrival of Mr. Morsi, which the press got wrong, to the ascending of the throne of MBS, who the press called it the darling, the liberal, to the obviously to the coup crisis in Ukraine, which led to the conflict in 2022, so between Russia and Ukraine. The press has largely been towards a particular view in that you're going to support the US government, you're not necessarily going to answer the truth. And part of that is because not only they don't want to see it, I think, part of it is because of politicization. And I always tell people, you don't need me. I mean, I'm glad you do. You don't need Tom Brokaw. All you do is look at the so-called experts, be the CIA, be for NBC, be for MSNBC, be New York Times. Go look their names up and ask 6 questions. Where were they on this going to war in Iraq? That is, did they believe Iraq had weapons of mass destruction for years to come? Did they predict the Arab Spring, which most of us knew 9 months and a year in advance? Did they believe Arab Spring was about democracy and human rights? Did they feel that overthrowing Assad and Libya was okay, even though it went against non-intervention? And did they believe MBS originally was this peacemaker, right? Moral standards. If you look at those things, and they were wrong on every single one, or 90%, run away. Because when you look at the best scholars, they have been wrong in every single one. So when it comes to Syria, I always tell my clients, if they were wrong on Iraq, wrong on Libya, wrong on Syria, wrong in Egypt, wrong in Arab Spring, wrong in Ukraine, they're wrong on this. They want to see what they want to see.
Yeah,
That's
but
how
Mitra,
Mr.
I
Trump
have to,
won
yeah. No, I think that's
domestically.
too, yeah, I think it's too simple. I think it's much too simple. I think that certainly it makes sense what you're saying, but I think you can take the same argument, if you will, and apply it to the other side and see the same outcome. But I think that's something that we can talk. I agree there's no more Tom Brokaw. I agree that journalism is different. But let's be honest, we do have still people that are renowned good journalists.
Yes.
And yeah, I tell you who I'm
Right.
thinking of right in a way is the guy that got fired from MSNBC, Mehdi something or other.
Mehdi Hassan Hassan.
Yeah,
Yes.
because
Yes.
he was spot on in so many ways, and they got
Absolutely.
rid of the guy, and he has his own show now, which I watch, And if you
Yes,
watch him interviewing a lot of people, he really
yes,
puts them on the spot. And I like him because he's not taking the BS anymore. So
right.
I agree that you're right in many ways, but I think also there's some people out there that really are good journalists
Right,
today.
there are, but it's more than that. I think they see the Islamic world, and even not just the Islamic world, but I like to call it the non-Eurocentric Western, non-Western world from a prism. So everybody has to be like the West. Everybody has to be like United States. So they put these glasses on and they refuse to see it from their perspective. That was what's about the Arab Spring. They were saying the overthrow of Mubarak, right, was about wanting human rights and democracy of the West. What they were overthrowing was United States support. They weren't overthrowing Mubarak because they wanted democracy. Human rights doesn't have to be democratic. So it's the same thing in Syria now. They still see it from a Western prism that says they want to be like us, they want Western democracy. The problem with that is that the concept of Western democracy, it's no longer accepted. Not because
But let
human
me
rights
take you.
isn't for everyone,
No, I
but because
agree.
of Gaza.
But I agree with you. But let me take you on another
Sure.
shift, and that is exactly what you just said. You said that Syria currently today is not about democracy and about this, that, that. Now let's take the 1 million Syrians who have
Mhm.
moved to Germany, who
Right.
are living under again, a quote unquote democratic state, which is totally different than they were living in before. Now, if you were to ask them
Mhm.
what's going on, don't you think that their answer would be different?
No, I think it depends who do you ask. I think you
Okay,
have a lot of Syrians who left. And by the way, it depends when they left and who
true.
they were,
Yeah,
right? So if they were Islamists who prefer an Islamist government, and by Islamist government, I don't mean a terrorist government, I mean an Orthodox government, like the ones the Israelis want to have at the moment, the ones that are bankrolling and supporting to Netanyahu, they would say, great, he's gone, right? Okay. So it really depends. But what is so fascinating, I think, about the social media and what is so fascinating how medium has changed is that now, even when you go to Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, you see the Muslim and not necessarily Arab, the non-Arab Muslim and others saying to those who are in Syria, bro, you're screwed because now you got a bunch of terrorists coming in, right? Because
yeah.
they know what's coming. So from you, it is as if the international community has significantly changed what is new medium, new power. I think the medium is more powerful than the sword itself.
Yeah.
So you have that, and people are going saying, it's not who they are. Look at the American, dictatorship. This is a coup by United States. This is a coup by Israel, and this is a coup by Turkey. So when you see those versus what you see, it's not just in the West. You have to be careful. You have many, if you say the same thing on Western press. So if you were talking about Western press writers, but not the people who read them, it's two different things. You will see that. But the reality is now that you have in Syria an Islamist led by an Islamist terrorist leader who was responsible for butchering, raping, pillaging, right? Who basically came up and said, no, I am not going to go after Israel right now. And by the way, the same person who just a year ago, along with others Islamists, were saying first Syria, then Al Aqsa Mosque in Israel, and then the holy Mecca and Medina in Jerusalem. So we are trying to create something that we cannot. And in a way, it really doesn't matter what the Western press says anymore. The traditional Western press is no longer respected or accepted with the exception of their own circular world. And that is, by the way, why they lost the domestic, because they see what they want to see, not what the others see.
But can't that also be the same, taken to the same uh, situation on the other side? Because let's be honest, if you take a look, and this is what we were talking about before, if you take a look at the press per se,
Sure.
it's the whole thing is discombobulated in a way. You don't know what you believe. So anyway,
Yes, I
okay.
know.
Okay,
No, but
sorry.
it's not the same because the American press, you always had like CBS, excuse me, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, right? Yet these individual characters in the non-Western press, particularly in Asia and particularly in the MENA region, you may have one or two, but you had so many that one person or two person didn't articulate. Even Al Jazeera, for the past number of years, it's no longer the power as it was. And by that I mean, yes, a lot of people watch it, absolutely. But there's so many other podcasts and news and everything else that you see the chef. I mean, I
Yeah,
have
but
found it
Mitra, we have that,
stunning.
but we have that all over the US as well. We have that all over the Western countries.
Exactly. But the
There's
power is
tons of
different.
information.
Yeah,
There's,
but it's different now. The United States press was this entity that helped to create a coup, even though some of them may not have known it, in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya. Now the situation is reversed. These nations, whether in the Middle East, whether it's Africa, whether Asia, they look at the American press and what they see. And if you read, they're like, bro, what are you doing? No one believes you. So when you have a head of a former Al-Qaeda leader who's not even a Syrian, and it's been on Israeli payroll since 2019, apparently, something that the Israelis admitted themselves 5, 6 years ago in various interviews. They are not going to listen what the American press says. It doesn't matter. The perfect example was Gaza, right? The American press largely remained quiet the first 2 weeks of what was happening in the Palestinian territories. They didn't show the butchery or the attacks. It was the non-American, non-Eurocentric social media that pushed the Americans, such as CNN, MSNBC, to show the other side. And so what they show on the American press, CNN, MSNBC, is important, but for a selective few. Most people do
Mitra,
not adhere to what they say.
yeah, but that is true to a certain point, and certain point it's not true because, like I said before, you have, as you do in the Middle East, et cetera, and Asia, et cetera, you have podcasts out the gazoo. You have radio stations out the gazoo. You think that a guy is traveling in Kansas on a lonely highway is tapping into CNN? No, he's tapping into his own media.
Right.
But anyway, I think this is something for another discussion. But it's very interesting point of view. Going to take a small break right now, and then we're going to start talking a little bit domestically about what's happening with those drones because that is fascinating to me. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. We touched up a little bit on Syria about the difference that one reads from the press regarding either Western press, Eastern press, Asian press, etc., and how different viewpoints are really valid depending on where you are reading your podcasts or your information or your social media. Now, this is something that's fascinating to probably the entire world because we've all seen the movies with Jeff Goldblum. We've all studied this. Mitra, what's going on with those drones over Jersey and not only in Jersey anymore, but
Yes.
India, Pakistan? I don't mean, it's like everywhere.
It's
And they're
everywhere
not
now,
just
right?
small. And they're not just small.
Right. You know, it's interesting because I love the History Channel. For the past 30 years, I watch it religiously. And one of the shows they have is Ancient Aliens, right? If you would have watched that 8 years ago, you're like, oh my God, these people are plump crazy, right? I mean, you don't know where they came. But honestly, I think as time has passed, and I think even the US government and the so-called, New York Times type of newspapers have said, there's something out there. I think people have begun to say, okay, something is obviously going on. For me, what I think it's important is that the US government is causing an unnecessary panic. So I think you need to, the days that the US government would say, believe me, especially whether you like it or not, this administration, which for many is as popular as a ham hock and a bar mitzvah, it's not going to, it's not going to believe you. You need to come up and say, okay, maybe it's the little, aliens with the green coming in. Maybe it's nothing. But telling the people, don't worry about it, but we don't know what it is, but we know it's not from an enemy, but we know it's not from the state, but don't worry. Oh, by the way, we just don't know what it is. You're really creating an unnecessary panic and you're fueling the conspiracy mindset that has taken over. So most people don't believe US anyway. And part of it is because of the press, because the press was so politicized, like very much many parts of the United States, so tribalized that no one really respects the traditional press. So I really don't know if it's little green or blue or purple things coming from out of space. But if it is them, maybe they have a solution for Syria. I mean, I don't know. Maybe
I find it
invite them
fascinating.
over. Maybe
No, but you're right because you're
maybe they
right.
could give me the lottery numbers and I could win and build myself a spaceship. I'd go
You're
live
right
with them.
because what's interesting to me is that the government has said nothing except, chill out or whatever. But this is unacceptable to me. This is silly, and I don't understand. And then we just had Chuck Schumer on
Right,
talking about, or Donald Trump saying, blow them out of the sky. It's as if they don't even know what they are,
right.
yet
I
they
think it was the
refuse.
governor of New Jersey. The governor of New Jersey said the same thing. The problem, I think, becomes the damage is done. The damage is done. I think the administration has made it clear that it cannot be trusted, not just that administration, but the government. So if it turns out to be nothing, there's going to be a segment of the society that's never going to believe it. They say, well, if it was nothing, why didn't you say it before? If it was something, then those who already held a particular view will say, well, there you go. This is proof that it's not conspiracy, that this is proof there's something out there. I think it was simply unnecessary,
Yeah.
unnecessary to let it to get this far. So it's sometimes I think you need to pull back and say, okay, I made a mistake, let me regroup. But I don't see that within the administration.
But
So I don't know.
it's almost as if they don't know what to say because they don't know what to say.
No, I understand that. But honestly, I think if they would have come up on TV and said, okay, we don't think it's little green men or women or it, we know it's not from an enemy, it's not from us. We're trying to figure out what it is, right? We just don't know what to say. It's also the problem with that is that supposedly we have the greatest satellites in the world. So if you have a satellite in space that could look into a mountain that's 10,000 feet below ground and can find I mean, obviously it's not 10,000 feet, but 2,000 feet below the pyramids in Latin America, and they find other pyramids, then I think you could look up and say, okay, you satellite sitting up there, what do you see these little ones happening the earth?
I
And
don't
for
I
some
don't
reason,
think I don't
you know,
think yeah, yeah, I know what you're saying, but I don't think it's that simple. I think in a way it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation because if they say anything and it's wrong, they're finished. If they say nothing, they're finished. So I think what's happening is being really honest, I don't think they know what it is, and I don't think they know how to get rid of it. And this is
so
what worries me because
right, exactly. But
it's not just our government, it's the other governments that it's happening to as well.
right, I understand what you're saying, but I think when you have how many, I think it's about 1,000 of these drones now. I think 1,000 of these they said I was reading, depending on something some extremely high number, up to 1,000. Some have argued. Somewhere you need to do something. You don't need to shoot it down for God's sake. This isn't the wild, wild west, poof, poof, poof. But I think, given our technology in space, I think we do have an idea of what it is. I mean, if you have that magnificent technology that you can hear things and you can see things and you can see the satellite. So if you're going to use that technology to see the satellite, what's in underneath of Iran, how could you not know what's those little drones running around? It really is beyond that. So
Yeah, but it takes me back to the time when the balloons were coming from China.
but the balloons, they were coming from China. Everybody knew they were coming from China. It was not the first time. And so, if this is not from China, if it's not from your enemies, is it from your allies? Then, figure out what's going on. You have a war in Middle East, you have a war in North Africa, you have a war in Europe. You have all of these things. You have a transition of power. And so I think you need to be a little bit honest. And you said earlier that they're damned if you do and they're damned if you don't. Well, in this case, then you are leaving office. see which one causes less damage. I think if they were honest with the public, it would have caused less damage than it is now.
Yeah, yeah, I
I
can agree
think
with
because
that.
the story, you would have sent something. They should have said, we're working with the drones, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to lie, at least lie a good one.
Well, the
But
question, I guess, on everybody's lips is, are they drones or are they something else?
right, is it like the show said, I love
Exactly.
History Channel, alien, alien
Exactly.
presentation?
Exactly.
Is it them? I don't know. But
Okay.
obviously, mathematically, we're not the only one. We
Exactly.
are not the only one. So
Right.
we're
All
not the
right.
only
We're
one.
gonna we're gonna end that session with not knowing, and we'll come back to that. And we have one more session left, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back. And the last segment of today's podcast is going to talk about the almighty pendulum swinging from east to west, west to east, perhaps north to south. We're not sure. But something has changed with the war in Ukraine, with the mess in the Middle East, with, let's say, the economics of the West, especially in Northern Europe at the moment, and what's happening perhaps in Asia. Mitra, what do you think? You think the pendulum is swinging? You think things are
Yeah, I
changing?
think the pendulum has been swinging for quite a long time. I think the pendulum began to swing by 2001 and eventually the invasion of Iraq. And I think I want to make it clear to the audience. Every 400 or 500 years or so, the pendulum goes from east to west, from west to east, right? You had the Persian Empire and the Egyptians, then the Romans came, then the Romans and you know, they fell, and then the Islamic empires fell, and then they fell. You had the Western world. And now it's going back to the East, but we don't mean just Islamic. We also mean Asiatic, where you're beginning to see the nations that once dominated the economic, the military, and the political are no longer the dominating factor. And by the way, part of that for the past 10 years is because of the social media, because one of the reasons United States was the major power and allowed to get what it wanted wasn't just its military and economic, but also political. That went out the door with the leaks, with the internet, with access to the leaks, with access to social media, when United States image just went out the door, particularly in the past year and a half. So if you see the world today, right, the issue is not that Arab or MENA region, Middle East and North Africa are facing crisis. They have always had that. The issue becomes Western powers, particularly the French, the United States, the British, are facing economic, military, and social crisis that they are unable to successfully address, right? And to contain. So, people always say that, United States is the greatest military economic power. Those days are long gone, right? Yes, China needs us, but we need China and Asia much more than they need us,
All right, let me ask
right?
you a
So the
question.
pendulum has begun.
Okay, let me ask you a question because you made a great point.
Sure.
You said that the Western world today is unfortunately having economic crises, which of course we see every single day. I mean, a perfect example is, you know, Volkswagen in Germany shutting
Right.
down plants, which was absolutely unheard of. Now, I want to ask you, this is maybe not politically correct, but we're
Right.
never going to be politically correct on
Doing
this show.
correct.
So, don't you think there is a direct correlation between the economic downturn of the West, i.e., like the countries you said, France, Germany, UK, etc., due to the absolute influx of migrants coming into those countries? Is
No, I
there a
think it's just one
correlation?
of the reasons that the crisis started. The migrants came in because we started the crisis. It's much more complicated than that. I think the crisis or the immigrants coming in is a major issue. It's a major problem. Absolutely. Because you have immigrants and you have immigrants. But if you return all of them, you're still not going to resolve the problem because you are economically and militarily totally damaged. Look, the reason France was because of its colonial power in Africa. Those days are gone. Jacques Chirac came up and said, I think it was about 30 years ago, more than that, about 35 years ago, that if France ever loses access to those 5 African nations in particular, like Gabon and such, we will finish. We will never be where we are. And France has lost that. Today, France rarely has access to those nations. Who has them access now? Russia, China, and Iran. And that, particularly Russia and China. And that's what people don't understand. So if you go to Middle East, right? Yes, we always told, we always had leadership. We were in charge of the leadership. We told them who we wanted, stuff like that. But that is no longer, even though we have that, we no longer have the political stability to keep what we want. And what that means is that, look, we brought in this guy and he's already been seen as a traitor and a coward and a puppet of the West. Soon he's going to go the leader of Syria as well. So when you no longer exercise the economic, the military, and for the United States in particular, the political authority, you're not going to do well. So I think refugee issue is a major issue. But I also want to make this warning to the Western European nations. You have to straighten yourself out. Absolutely. Immigration is a problem. But I wouldn't be kicking all of them out because, what's going to happen is, if I may, what is moving in is China, Russia, Asia, Asiatic nations. So you're absolutely right. Immigration is an issue, a major one, major issue. It's draining your economy.
Right.
It's draining your economy.
Right. So
but
this is,
also so are the wars. When you write a check to Ukraine, but wait a minute, when you go write a check to Ukraine and you cutting benefits of your own people, you have a problem.
But Mitra, we can talk about that until the crows come out of the kitchen. I know. But the problem I see here is because we were talking about one subject, and that is
absolutely
economically,
yes,
the West. And I think, honestly, when you look at what the UK is trying to do now,
yes,
sending people back,
yes,
do you realize that I think, again, I just read it, I'm not sure where I read it, that the US and the UK have sent more people back than I don't know how long. What's interesting to me is where you see the countries now that have these huge immigration economic issues, and how are they starting to vote? Where's the pendulum swinging in Western Europe?
It's going to the right.
Right.
Absolutely. Look, for example, but the immigration is a major issue. Look, Germany was economically great until the Ukrainian war. So that was
until the Syrians came in.
Even when did Mrs. Merkel leave?
She left before the Ukrainian war. She was not around for the Ukrainian war.
So the economy was still top dog back then.
Yeah, but
what I'm trying to tell you,
it wasn't.
No.
It started going down because of the million Syrians that they brought in after.
No. Wait a minute. The millions, I get that it had an impact, but what really broke Germany's back was the war in Ukraine, because when they blew up the gas pipeline, and when they took all of those refugees from Ukraine, that also had a huge impact.
No, that is incorrect. No,
Mitra, the numbers are there. You can't
Mitra,
say,
excuse me. Mitra, excuse me. I'm sorry. Every single Ukrainian that came is totally different than every single Syrian that came. First of all, Poland took the #1 amount of Ukrainians, not Germany. Number 2, and I was just there in Berlin, the amount of Ukrainians who are there are all working legally and putting money towards the system. So this is different than the Syrians.
No, listen, first of all, not all Ukrainians are working. They're working legally because they gave them status, because they're Christians and they were white. They didn't do that to the Syrians. So you can't ignore that.
The Syrians didn't want to work, Mitra. They were there for a short time.
I agree. Wait a minute. Not all of them are the same. I agree. I'm the first one to tell you that. Not all Syrians are the same. What I'm trying to tell you is that the Syrian crisis apparently is over. Send them home and rebuild.
Yeah,
the problem is you can't send them home now, because some of them, if you've been there 12 years, they have kids. Where are you going to send them to? So you can't send those home. But you have to have a point system. And by the way, you got to do the same things with the Ukrainians. They need to go home and rebuild.
Absolutely.
They need to go home, because why? The reason German economy is significantly lower. It isn't just because of the Syrian, but also
No,
because of the
agreed.
Ukrainians. I have
Agreed.
Germans who are saying, I have German friends who are also saying, enough with the Ukrainian refugees. You are paying 10
Agreed.
times for gas than you did before the war. They got shafted, excuse my language, when they took the US side. So what you have now, it's not just refugees. If you send them all home, you're still going to have a problem because Germany, because France, because UK, and even US no longer has access to the world that gave it carte blanche to become rich. France was well off, not because of the immigrants, was because he had access to Africa. That's
a
gone.
good point.
What the hell
That's
they
a
got
good
to do with
point.
the refugees? That's
Right, it's
gone.
a good point. Good point.
Germany has problems. So let's say you send a million Syrians back. You're still gonna have a problem. Why? Because you're still paying more for gas. You're still connected to China. So even though Volkswagen closed and all of those things, the Chinese are there, right? Same thing with UK. What China and in some ways India did to the West is what the British did to India, right? And China with the Opium Wars, right?
Right.
So China came in, got the West hooked on cheap goods because the stock market was doing great. All these people became wealthy, but now you got hooked, and now you can't go back.
Right.
That's why. So,
but I wonder now.
Issue.
Yeah, I agree.
But no.
I agree with you, and I wonder now. And only time will tell.
Yeah.
What will Donald Trump do differently? Because the cards, in a way, are stacked against him.
Absolutely.
See. But let's see.
I think Mr. Biden ensured the cards were again. I think in Middle East, Biden created this terrorist to go in a way. The timing isn't lost on anyone. A month and a half, 2 months before Donald Trump moves in, and you created this little coup. So I don't think that's lost on anyone. Or
but on the other side, Mitra, Donald Trump was a big supporter of Netanyahu, and he's allowing him to go in.
Netanyahu is one thing.
Yeah.
Allowing this crisis to go on for 14 months is something else. Because whether you like it or not, Israel is done politically. It will never be seen as a democracy. It will never be respected as a power. It's becoming a theocratic autocracy. And Israel, in many ways, it's like this Baccarat crystal vase, right? I don't know. It's this very hoity-toity vase, right? I'll give you an example. It's one of the lovely things I got for my wedding. So my son, my two little sons, when they were younger, they were playing soccer in the bedroom, in the living room. Poof, they broke it. I glued it back together. But the value it's gone, I could never really put in it. In a way, that's Israel. Its military would never be the same again, despite being occupied here. Its economy will never be the same when 600,000 has left. And its public persona and influence is like 90% gone, despite going to the Arab world and saying, I'm with you, I'm the power. It doesn't matter. The power is no longer in the Arab world. So it's the same thing here. United States, France, Germany, Britain, these northern, I'm going to say northern, Western, and or Anglo-Saxon nations no longer exercise the power they once had. And nothing's going to get that. Nothing's going to get. And I always tell people, I want you to go back to 1994, 1995, 30 years ago. Where was the United States economically, military, politically? Where was Israel economically, military, politically? And where was China, Russia, and Iran economically, military, politically? They were nothing. And where they are today. And where is the West today? So go on a sheet of paper, write down the economic power, the military power, the political influence of the United States.
But Mitra, I have to disagree with you. I have to disagree with you.
I know you would, but United States was a unipolar
you're putting Russia. You're putting Russia as a politically, economically, and militarily strong country.
One or the three. It doesn't have to be all the same.
But
no. What I'm saying was that 30 years ago, it wasn't any of that. Today,
that is incorrect.
2 out of 3.
That is incorrect, because after the fall of the wall, that's when Russia started really, really reaping the benefits of being part of the quote-unquote Western world.
No. In 1994, the Russians have all been a genius in that. When it benefits them, they're European. When it benefits them, they're Asians.
I agree
But
with
in
you.
1994, Vicky, in 1994, the Russians were shell of themselves. Eastern Europe was gone. NATO was
But
expanding.
Gorbachev, but
Central Asia is
Gorbachev,
gone.
but Gorbachev was wheeling and dealing with the West.
No, but Gorbachev did it. He had no hand. That is why the Russians are pissed. It was a weakened empire. What do you think that, I know people to forget. Remember the war in Kosovo. Remember that what was happening in Serbia. So Russia had nuclear weapons, but it was a shell of what it was. Today, it's not a unipolar world. It's a multipolar world where the definition of power has changed to various stages of individual nations exercising various forms of power. That's the shift is. If United States walks into the UN and demands that they side with United States today, in the case of Israel, only 10 nations sided with the US. And those 10 nations, with all due respect, half of them, if you put it together, would not be making up the state of Florida. So I think whether you like it or not, United States is not the empire it was, and neither any Western powers. Doesn't mean China doesn't have problems, doesn't mean India doesn't have problems, doesn't mean Iran doesn't have problems, doesn't mean Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, they don't have problems. They do. But the pendulum has begun to swing. And very much like 18th century, when the Islamic empires, particularly the Mughals, the Ottomans, and the Safavids, were a shell of themselves, there was chaos, there was war, there was blood everywhere in Middle East and parts of Asia, like it is today. The Western empires, the British, the French, to a certain extent, obviously the Russians and Germans, and the Dutch, they moved in. But today it's reverse. It's the Asians that are moving. So
all right, but let's watch this space. Let's watch this space. Let's see what Mr. Trump is going to do. Anything differently?
I'm not sure what he can do. I'm not sure what he can do. They tied
we'll
his
see.
hands
We'll
in
see.
some ways.
We'll see. We'll see.
Let's see.
All right. Thank you, Mitra.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Till next time.